Hey, Mike Partika here. Welcome to the first official episode of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm going to be doing, I mentioned I'd be doing commentaries on scriptural texts and other kinds of books to do with religions and religious topics. And one of the things I mentioned is sometimes I'd be doing commentaries on commentaries. And that is what I'll be doing today. This is Dennis Prager's book, The Rational Bible, Exodus, God, Slavery, and Freedom. So I picked this up a while back and I'm just starting to read it now. It is a commentary on the Old Testament book of Exodus. Now, I say Old Testament, that's Christian parlance. If you were to talk about it as a Jew, you would just say the Hebrew Bible or the Bible. In specifically, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible are called the Torah, and they are the most significant books in all of Judaism. Exodus is the second of those. The reason he started with the second of those is because Exodus contains the 10 Commandments, and that is a subject that he expounds on in one of his other books, which I don't really remember the name of. I want to say just the 10 Commandments, still the best moral code. But you can look it up under his name. His name's Dennis Prager, Prager. You may have heard of him because he founded the online quote-unquote university called PragerU, which puts out a lot of 5-minute videos on conservative thought. And I would recommend checking out that channel. Now, he also has a series on the 10 Commandments on that channel, so look that up too. It's very good. So, why did I want to start off with the Rational Bible? Well, when I was reading through it, I happened to notice something that I had actually been in dialogue with Mr. Prager about on his radio show. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's because he didn't find anything I had to say very persuasive, or maybe there are substantial reasons for why he didn't make a change to what he was coming out with. But he has a section towards the introduction in his book, I haven't even made it to the first chapter yet, in which he's talking about a particular passage in Scripture, and I'm just going to go ahead and read from the book. To set it up, he basically says, if you believe that the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, if you believe it's man-made, then whenever you encounter a morally or intellectually problematic verse or passage, you have an easy explanation. Men screwed up. I'm not quoting exactly, I'm kind of condensing some of the stuff. We don't need to try and understand it morally or intellectually, but if you believe that God wrote the Torah, then you have to figure out why this seemingly immoral passage is actually moral. And so he brings up the example of the Wayward Son. There is a Torah law that says if you have a particularly bad or wayward son, you may take him to the elders of your city, which make up the court, and if they find him guilty, they are to stone him to death. When modern men and women read that, they dismiss it as morally primitive. What do you expect from people who wrote something 3,000 years ago? But since this is Dennis Prager talking, don't believe it's something people wrote, I don't have that option. Consequently, I have had to look for rational explanations for seemingly irrational laws and passages, and for moral explanations for seemingly immoral laws and passages. And I have almost always found them. In this case, for example, I came to understand that this law was one of the great moral leaps forward in the history of mankind. In this law, the Torah brilliantly preserved parental authority while permanently depriving parents of the right to kill their children. A commonplace occurrence in the ancient world, and even today if you count, for example, Muslim honor killings. I should say honor killings in the Muslim world. He does not specifically say that honor killings is a Muslim thing. So let's make sure to split that hair. The law permits only a duly established court, which is the elders, not parents, to take the life of their child. And we have no record of any court in Jewish history ever executing a wayward son. Or do we? See, that was the portion that I took issue with on Dennis Prager's radio show when I had the chance to talk with him, because there actually is a recorded instance of a wayward son's execution. And where I found that out from was this book. It says Iyov, but that's actually it's actually Iyov. But what will we know this as? We would know this as the Book of Job. This is a Hebrew and English translation of the Book of Job, which is one of the writings of the Bible. It's not a part of the Torah, but it is a very, very early book, chronologically speaking, in terms of when the book was written. This is one of the oldest stories known to man. And in the Book of Job, there is some discussion among the commentators in the Mishnah. Or actually, did I get that right? No, the Midrash. The Midrash is like, it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what the Midrash is, because there's different kinds of things that are considered Midrash. But from watching some YouTube videos online, what I found was that the Midrash is the transcribed oral law of the Jewish faith, whereas the Hebrew Bible would be the transcribed written law, especially the first 5 books, which is the Torah. So within Judaism, there is an idea that God delivered to Moses both a written law, which we know as the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible, and an oral law, which is a body of interpretive framework, like tradition, that was also passed to Moses by God, and which Moses passed down and was handed down from rabbi to rabbi to rabbi to rabbi to rabbi. And so the Midrash is the transcribed version of that oral law, that oral tradition that helps people to interpret the Bible. Okay, so part of that oral law is the Midrash Haggadah Vayikra. And one of the things that it discusses is whether Job, who was a character in the title character in the Book of Job, was a real person. There was discussion about that. Well, there happened to be a rabbi who said yes, he was a real person. And specifically, he says that there's a passage in the Midrash Haggadah Vayikra that lists a number of things which never were and never will be. So basically it's saying, okay, these things have never happened. And the 5th of those things was, you will never encounter any descendants of Job, because Job was not a real person. Now this rabbi denies this. He says, I actually did encounter Job's grandchildren. I don't know if he means necessarily grandchildren or just great-grandchildren or descendants or what have you, because Job doesn't actually give you a time period when all this took place, which is one of the reasons it's hard to tell whether or not he was a real person or not. Now, what also exists in that list that this Rabbi Nosson, who encountered Job's grandchildren, said that even though you say it never happened, I had personal experience with it happening. Well, as it happens, the Wayward Son is one of those particular instances. He says, regarding the Wayward Son, I sat in the court which judged a wayward son, and I stood at his grave. So, here's the thing. I don't know whether the Midrash Haggadah Vayikra counts as records of the court, historical records, what have you. But having read this, where you have a rabbi actually stating that he sat on the court that judged and executed a wayward son, I would not have put that last line in Dennis Prager's summary of that, which basically said that we have no historical records whatsoever of that ever happening. Now, I made that clear to him on his radio show. I have passed that information to him on Facebook and also on Twitter, and apparently it hasn't made a dent. I don't know if that's because the information in this book is valid or not. This book, by the way, is by Art Scroll. You can actually find them on Twitter if you do a @Art Scroll. And I have got a bunch of this stuff. These books. Not this in particular. The only reason I bought this one, this is a very early commentary edition. They have newer ones out now that I recommend in their place. These are more complete. They have commentary just out the wazoo. But I actually recommend the newer models because they condense things down a little better. So, yeah, I don't know whether the Midrash Haggadah Vayikra counts as history. If it does, then Mr. Prager's statement is false. There actually is an account of the execution of a wayward son. And that is pretty much all I wanted to say for this edition of Don't Take This as Gospel. I will continue to read the book, and if there's any more interesting tidbits from there that I find, I will be sure to share them with you. So thanks for joining me. This is Mike Partika, and y'all take care.